There are 3 words that Jesus spoke in a language almost no one remembers today. They were never meant to disappear, yet somewhere between empires, translations, and centuries of silence, they were softened, simplified, or lost entirely. These were not ordinary words. They were spoken over the sick, whispered over the broken, carried in the breath of a man who healed with nothing but sound and presence. And the strange truth is, the version of these words that reached you was never the original one. Tonight, that changes. One by one, across this video, these 3 ancient sounds will be revealed exactly as they once were spoken, in the language Jesus himself used. Stay until the end, because the 3rd word connects to the first 2 in a way you will not expect. The language Jesus chose for the deepest moments of his life. Most people never stop to ask a simple question. What language did Jesus actually speak, day to day, in the streets of Galilee, at the table with his closest friends, in the silence before a miracle? The truth is that Jesus likely understood more than one language. Hebrew was the sacred language of the Scriptures, read aloud in the synagogue. Greek was the language of trade and empire, spoken in the marketplaces and used by scholars and officials across the region. But there was one language that belonged to his home, to his family, to the quiet hours of his childhood before he ever stood in front of a crowd. That language was Aramaic. It was the language his mother likely sang to him. It was the language spoken around the fire at night, the language of ordinary people, farmers, fishermen, and the sick who had nowhere else to turn. And when the most important moments of his life and ministry arrived, it was Aramaic that Jesus reached for. When he taught the crowds gathered on the hillside, he taught in Aramaic. When he stood before the suffering, offering healing with nothing but his voice and his hands, the words that left his mouth were Aramaic. Even in the Gospels, written mostly in Greek, there are moments so significant that the original Aramaic words were preserved exactly as spoken, untranslated, because something about them could not simply be converted into another language without losing what made them powerful. This detail matters more than it may seem. Aramaic was not simply a convenient dialect for Jesus. It was his language of intimacy, the language in which his deepest teachings and his most sacred acts of healing were first spoken into existence. When he called out to a dead child, when he cried out in his final hours, when he taught his followers how to pray, it was Aramaic sounds that carried those moments long before any translator ever touched them. Tonight, 3 of those original sounds are about to be spoken again. Their names alone are worth carrying with you for the rest of this journey. The first is Abwun, the second is Asya, the third is Schlama. You have just heard them, but hearing a name is not the same as understanding what it carries. Stay close, because what each of these words truly holds, the story behind it, the moment Jesus spoke it, and what it can still awaken in you today, is only beginning to unfold. Why something was lost, and why it can be found again. Every time these 3 words moved from Aramaic into Greek, and later from Greek into Latin, and later still from Latin into hundreds of modern languages, a small piece of their original power slipped quietly away, not because translators were careless, but because some things simply cannot survive translation intact. A word is never only its dictionary meaning. A word is sound, rhythm, breath, and intention. And Aramaic was built in a way that let a single word carry multiple layers of meaning at once, something most modern languages were never designed to hold. Ancient Aramaic was also deeply connected to vibration and sound in a way that is easy to overlook today. In the ancient Near East, spoken words were not treated as neutral containers of information. They were understood as carrying energy, force, and intention, especially when spoken by someone recognized as holy or set apart. When Jesus spoke healing over a body, or peace over a storm, or forgiveness over a broken heart, ancient listeners did not experience this as mere information being communicated. They experienced it as something happening, something being released into the space between speaker and listener. This is part of why recovering Abwun, Asya, and Schlama matters so deeply today. It is not simply an academic exercise in linguistics. It is an attempt to reconnect with the actual sound, weight, and vibration of what Jesus spoke rather than only the flattened meaning that survived centuries of translation. When you hear these words, as they were first spoken, something in you may recognize a frequency that modern language quietly lost along the way. Each of these three words stands as its own doorway. One reconnects you to the source of everything. One invites restoration into every layer of your being. One brings you back into a wholeness that no circumstance can fully take from you. Spoken together, in the order Jesus himself modeled through his life and his teaching, they do not remain three separate ideas. They become a path. In the chapters ahead, each word will be unpacked slowly and completely, one at a time. You will hear how it was pronounced, where it appears in the story of Jesus, what it meant to the people who first heard it fall from his lips, and how it can still speak into whatever you are carrying today, whether that is physical pain, emotional exhaustion, or a quiet ache in the soul that has not yet found its name. Stay close, because once the first word is revealed in full, you will understand why so many people say that something shifts in them the moment they hear it spoken aloud, exactly as Jesus once spoke it. First revelation, Abwun, say it slowly. Abwun, any menos pronuncia. Abwun, Abwun. This is the word Jesus used at the very opening of the prayer. He taught his closest followers the prayer known today simply as Our Father. But Father is only the surface translation, the thin outer layer of something far deeper. In Aramaic, Abwun is built from a root that carries the sense of a parent, a source, and a creative force all at once. The way warmth comes from a fire without the fire ever losing itself in the giving. Some who have studied the ancient language describe Abwun as pointing to something like a womb of creation, a birthing source that is both intimate and vast at the same time. It is not the image of a distant ruler seated far away on a throne, untouched by human suffering. It is the image of something living, something breathing, something continuously giving rise to life. The way roots continuously feed a tree, without ever being seen above the soil. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, Jesus begins his most famous prayer with this exact word, teaching that before anything is asked for, before any request is made, there must first be this recognition, this returning to a source of love that is closer than breath itself. He did not open with a request. He opened with a relationship. He opened by naming the one thing every human heart, sick or well, rich or poor, ancient or modern, has quietly longed to know is real, that they are not alone, and they were never truly abandoned. Historically ancient listeners hearing Abwun would have felt something instantly familiar and instantly comforting. In a world where fathers often ruled with distance and authority, where survival depended on hierarchy and status, Jesus was offering something almost scandalous in its tenderness. He was telling farmers, fishermen, the sick, the outcast, and the forgotten that the source of all creation was not far away, judging from a distance, but as close and as present as the next breath they would take. This matters enormously when we consider healing. So often, the deepest wound underneath physical or emotional suffering is not the illness itself, but the fear that comes with it, the fear of being alone in it, the fear of being forgotten in the middle of the pain. Abwun was never simply a title. It was a declaration spoken directly into that fear. It was Jesus reminding everyone who would listen that healing does not begin with fixing what is visibly broken. It begins with remembering that you were never disconnected from the source of your strength in the first place. Think for a moment about what it might have felt like to be someone in that ancient crowd, carrying an illness no physician could name, an act no ritual had resolved, and to hear a man stand before you and speak this word, Abwun, with such certainty that it planted something new inside your chest. Not a cure delivered instantly, but a doorway opened, a doorway back to belonging, a doorway back to being held by something larger than the diagnosis, larger than the diagnosis, larger than the fear. When someone repeats Abwun today, even without understanding a single word of Aramaic, something in the body and the spirit still responds. It becomes a quiet reminder, almost a returning, that before anything needs to be fixed, there is already a source holding you. This is the first doorway, and once it opens, it prepares the ground for everything that comes next. There is a deeper layer behind what you have just discovered. If you feel called to continue this journey, The complete study guide is waiting for you through the link in the pinned comment. Second revelation. Asya. Asya. Pronuncia. Asa. Is the ancient Aramaic word for healer, the one who restores what is broken. It shares its root with the very concept of medicine and physicians throughout the ancient Near East. But its meaning reached far beyond a simple professional title. To be called Asya was to be recognized as someone who could see beneath the surface of a wound. Someone who addressed not only what was visible, but what had caused the wound to exist in the first place. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus is described again and again, reaching toward the sick, the isolated, the ones others had already given up on. He touched lepers. No one else would come near. He stopped for a woman who had suffered for 12 years and had spent everything she had searching for a cure. He knelt beside children, the blind, the and those whom the rest of society had quietly decided were beyond hope. He was not simply performing miracles for spectacle or proof. He was embodying, moment after moment, the very meaning of someone whose presence itself became a place where restoration could happen. In the ancient world, healing was never understood as a purely physical event, separate from emotion or spirit. To be an SY meant addressing the body, the heart, and the soul as one interconnected whole. Because ancient wisdom understood something that modern medicine is still, in many ways, rediscovering today. A body cannot fully heal while the heart remains isolated, unseen, or afraid. This is strikingly different from how modern language sometimes separates healing the body from healing the heart, as though they exist in entirely different categories. In Aramaic thought, they never were separated at all. Consider the story of the woman who touched the edge of Jesus' robe, hoping simply to be near enough to receive something of his healing presence. He did not simply allow a physical transaction to occur and move on. He stopped. He turned. He asked who had touched him. Not because he needed the information, but because that woman needed to be seen, to be acknowledged, to have her suffering witnessed and named before she could fully receive what SYA truly offered. Her body was restored. Yes, but so was her place among the people who had avoided her for over a decade. This is the deeper meaning carried inside Asya. It was never only about removing a symptom. It was about restoring a person to wholeness in every sense. Physical, emotional, social, and spiritual, all at once. When Jesus healed, he did not simply repair what was malfunctioning. He restored dignity. He restored belonging. He restored the sense that a person was still worthy of love and connection, even in the middle of their suffering. When you hold this word in your mind, ASYA, you are invited to remember that true healing rarely happens instantly or magically, and it rarely happens in isolation. It happens the way Jesus modeled it, through presence, through attention, through treating the whole person as worthy of restoration, not just the symptom that is easiest to see and easiest to name. Asya does not simply ask, what is wrong with you? It asks, what would make you whole again? If this second revelation touched something inside you, imagine experiencing the complete teaching exactly as it has been preserved. The complete guide, with pronunciation, historical background, and practical application, is available through the pinned comment. Third revelation. Schlama. Schlama. Pronuncia. Schlama is often translated simply as peace, but that translation only touches the surface. In Aramaic, Schlama shares its root with wholeness, completeness, something restored after being fractured. It is the same root found in the Hebrew word shalom, a greeting that was never just a wish for calm, but a wish for someone to be whole again in every part of who they are. When Jesus greeted his followers after fear, confusion, or grief, the Gospels record him offering exactly this word, not calm down, but something closer to be whole again. It was spoken over a storm, threatening to capsize a small boat on the Sea of Galilee. It was spoken over grieving hearts at the edge of a tomb. It was spoken into a locked room where frightened followers believed all hope was lost before he offered anything else. Ancient listeners understood Schlama as an active force, not a passive feeling waiting in the background. It was not merely the absence of trouble. It was the presence of restored order, the felt sense that nothing essential had been permanently lost, even in the middle of suffering. When Jesus spoke peace over violent waves, He was not asking the wind to be polite. He was declaring Schlama over something that appeared completely broken, and it responded, "This matters for healing." People often wait for peace to arrive, only after every problem is solved. But Schlama, as Jesus demonstrated, was never something that waited on the other side of difficulty. It was something spoken and received in the very center of the storm, before the outcome was even known. To carry Schlama today is to understand that wholeness can rest inside you even now, even while uncertainty remains, exactly as Jesus offered it to those who walked beside him. Reflection: Abwun, Asya, and Schlama disappeared from common understanding for reasons that have nothing to do with their power and everything to do with the limits of translation. Ancient Aramaic thinking was circular and relational, allowing a single word to hold emotional, physical, and spiritual meaning at once. Greek thinking, which shaped how these teachings were recorded, leaned instead toward precision and fixed definitions. Something was lost in that shift, and lost again as Greek moved into Latin, and again as Latin moved into hundreds of modern languages. Words that once held multiple dimensions of meaning were narrowed into tidy, translatable boxers. This is not the fault of any single translator working faithfully within their own language. It is simply what happens when a living language crosses centuries and civilizations that never shared the same worldview. This is why so few people today have heard these words spoken in their original form, carrying their original weight. They remain quietly preserved in ancient manuscripts, in the liturgical traditions of communities that still speak Aramaic, and in the careful work of scholars, but rarely in the everyday spiritual life of most modern believers. Tonight, that changed. 3 words, once spoken by Jesus himself, were returned to their original sound. Abwun Asya Schlama. Not translated, not softened, spoken. Join the hundreds of students already practicing the original Aramaic through our study guides. The link is in the first pinned comment. If these 3 ancient words spoke to something inside you tonight, write 1 word in the comments below. Restoration, let it be your declaration, and let someone else scrolling through find hope in seeing it there. Thank you for walking this ancient path with me today. May Schlama peace, wholeness, rest with you, now and always.